Hello humans, and welcome to the return of the Sizzling Scale. Hold on to your objections and evidence because we're about to embark on a journey to uncover the truth behind the Ace Attorney trilogy. In chronological fashion, we're starting with the very first game. Now, I personally have been badgered to play this series for a very long time, and in holiday season fashion, I woke up on Christmas morning to find a very thoughtful but also very forceful gift under my proverbial Steam Christmas tree from my friend Blue. And so on that day, my journey into the Ace Attorney franchise began. I'm gonna start my discussion by talking about the story, characters, and narrative. As the name of the game so clearly states, you are a lawyer, more specifically a defense attorney whose job is to defend your clients and clear their names of any wrongdoings. However, it doesn't really stop there, as you find yourself constantly revisiting the scene of the crime, talking to suspects and witnesses, and probing further into evidence and clues that will be able to lead you to the real criminal behind the scenes. This means that you aren't just a simple classic lawyer, you are technically an investigator or a detective at the same time. You start off by being presented with a case where one person is being put on trial as the main suspect, and throughout the case you will slowly but surely unravel the real story at hand. There are a total of 5 cases in this game, and you see the return of a lot of familiar faces and characters throughout the cases, such as the police detective Gumshoe, the judge, your assistant, and of course your rival prosecutor, Miles Edgeworth. This allows for a lot of continuity and character development, not only of yourself, but also the supporting cast. As an example, Edgeworth shows up in Case 2 and is a consistent presence throughout the rest of the game. During Case 2, I hated his guts, but by the time I finished the game, he was actually my favorite character simply because of how well the game develops him and his backstory. You really do start to get attached to some of these characters and their mannerisms, and when they're gone, you start to miss their presence, and that's a testament to how well presented they are throughout. However, as with life, not all things are made equal, and as I said earlier, there are 5 cases, and unfortunately they are not all consistently as engaging. In order for me to give this a really thorough review, I'm going to go into slight details about each case individually. I won't spoil anything major, but this is your chance to skip ahead to the time marked on your screen or in the YouTube timestamps below if you wish to avoid any and all spoilers pertaining to this game. Alright, now that you've been warned, it's time to dive into a small review of each case. The first case is very much a tutorial case. You and your mentor Mia are defending your childhood friend Larry Butts in a case that involves the murder of his girlfriend. There's nothing earth-shattering here, it's a very simple sequence, with the game mostly guiding you towards making the right choices to find the real killer behind the scenes and prove your client innocent. This mostly sets the scene for what you're going to end up doing for the rest of the game, and as a tutorial case, also has some scary levels of plot relevance as well, so solid start in general. Case 2, however, is where things start to get interesting. In a very quick turn of events, you all of a sudden find yourself embroiled in another murder mystery, except this time your mentor, Mia, is the one who has been murdered. I have to admit I wasn't expecting this plot twist to happen so quickly, and even if I was expecting it, there's really no way to even see it coming. I say this case is interesting not only because it brings with it some continuity from the previous case, which you'll see if you play it, but it also introduces Miles Edgeworth, which is your main prosecution rival you will fight against for the rest of the game. As I briefly mentioned earlier, I hated Edgeworth's guts in this case. He was annoying and immediately countered every single point I bring forward to try and prove my client's innocence. This case had a lot of nice humor that actually made me laugh out loud, which is thankfully also something the game continues to do moving forward. And if that wasn't enough, we also see the introduction of a very interesting character who will come on to be our main assistant throughout the game. Though, this character happens to have some supernatural powers that let her speak with the dead, and so she will channel the spirit of our recently deceased mentor Mia to help aid us in figuring out our cases moving forward. Initially, I honestly thought that this supernatural aspect was a bit of a cop-out at times, and it felt a bit cheap, as I wasn't really using my own deduction skills and instead relying on a psychic to bring me or point me to evidence that I can use in my case to win. I actually think in Case 2, she literally just hands you a piece of paper that's like one of the main proving points for the case, so I really did not like that minor thing. But thankfully, overall, it's actually not that intrusive in the grand scheme of things. Case 2 concludes with a very nice ending. It's not the most mind-blowing case as it unravels, because you can kind of tell very quickly who's at fault here, but it is very nice as it's one that introduces the characters and starts to establish the overarching narrative. And now we get to Case 3. As they say, what goes up must come down, except we just went up really high in Case 2 and came down really quickly for Case 3. See, just as I thought the game was starting to get really interesting, the characters were all in sync, the plot details were starting to get really spicy, we immediately happened upon the game's first major issue. In general, there seems to be an overarching story that is unraveling piece by piece with each case, but for some reason, the developers thought it was a good idea to throw a wrench in that and put it on pause with Case 3. This isn't to say Case 3 is bad or anything, but I felt it was the weakest of all of them and it really disconnected me from the narrative of the story, especially after setting up an intriguing plot in Case 2 that you can't help but get excited to see the continuation of. It immediately took us to a really far-off setting with one really annoying character, and I actually think that's another thing I didn't like about it. The characters in this case were just uninteresting. I found myself being uninvested in the narrative, there weren't really humorous, and overall, this one just felt like it randomly dragged along until its very anticlimactic reveal. However, you can find a silver lining in anything if you want, and this case does have a silver lining. See, it serves as a bit of a development point for Mr. Miles Edgeworth. Remember how I said he was terribly annoying the last case? Well, in this case, I found it a bit interesting to see that the Edgeworth who we were being told about and exposed to isn't all what he seems to be. I really don't want to say it outright in order to avoid spoiling even the minor details, but this is where I genuinely started to appreciate his presence, and I started to feel a parallel developing between him and our main character, Phoenix. Anyways, rant over, now I get to move on to my favorite case in the game, Case 4. This case is actually masterful. Like the prior two cases, our rival Miles Edgeworth is heavily involved, except this time with a little twist. This time, he's not on the prosecution stand. No, you see, this time he's our client, and we get to go on a journey to prove his innocence instead. As if the parallels from the previous case weren't enough, this time we're working with Edgeworth directly to help him. It brings with it a savage Mr. Manfred von Karma as our opposing prosecutor instead of Edgeworth, and I'm going to spoil absolutely nothing about this case because it's so interesting, and I'm going to be as vague as possible here with the points I'm about to make. This case is a little bit on the longer end and tends to go on for multiple days in-game, obviously not in real life, otherwise that would be a problem. But each time you go in and out of court, you find yourself revisiting and reinvestigating the areas you had been in previously in order to find new pieces of evidence, talk to people who have now reappeared, or press previously involved people on new details that you've discovered. But what's so great about it is how it really starts to establish the intricate details of the plot that Case 2 only briefly touched on. Remember how I was salivating for more? Well, Case 4 gives you a lot more, and you get a lot of backstory on Miles Edgeworth as well, and a little bit more on the history of the Faye family and their involvement in everything, but it also touches on a dark aspect of the judicial system, and that's corruption. For the sake of brevity, and again, not spoiling things, that's all I'm going to say here. It's a brilliant case and is mechanically very similar to the previous ones, but the content and story bits of it are very juicy and super interesting. And last but not least, we've got Case 5. Case 5 is a bit of an outlier. For one, it's extremely long, probably double the length of Case 4. Just to put things in perspective, I played all of Case 1 to Case 4 in one day, and then it took me an entire day to finish Case 5. It's also a case that wasn't in the original game and was added later. From a story continuity standpoint, I didn't really feel any disconnect, but the credits do roll after Case 4, so that can be slightly confusing. This case is heavy. Like the previous one, it brings a lot of development, but this time it's not just for Miles Edgeworth, but for the relationship that we have with him specifically. I feel like with this case, we really start to solidify this connection between prosecutor and defense attorney, and it begins to feel like more of a tennis rally than it is a match to be won. And I actually really appreciate this continuity in the cases. It's like Case 2 has him being someone you hate, Case 3 has him improve a little bit and you see him in a different light, Case 4 has you actually defending him so you're on the same team, and then Case 5 is kind of like a summation of the previous 3 cases where you take all of that experience and he sort of internalizes it and begins to process it. So The beauty of the writing of Miles Edgeworth is just off the charts, and Case 5 really hammers it home here. It also goes a lot deeper into the theme of corruption and behind-the-scenes manipulation as you seek to penetrate through layers upon layers of story, plot twists, and evidence. The ties it has with the Faye family are also there, but it brings in a new angle through a handful of new characters that we haven't seen before. However, in this case, we also get a few new mechanics to play with, such as investigating blood residue and fingerprinting evidence, which I actually really enjoyed since it gives the game another layer of depth and more things for you to do. This case also felt slightly more difficult to me as I found myself having to think a little bit more outside the box to make a few of my decisions. Aside from that, the story was also excellent here, and it felt like its own standalone story that tied into the events from a different angle. So yeah, that's all the recap for the 5 cases back to back. If you're back here from skipping ahead, the summary is I found the story to be incredibly interesting, and I finished the entire game in 2 days. I was constantly engaged, and I found myself sucked into the world so deeply that I forgot about real life around me, which is a very refreshing feeling to have sometimes. I also again want to emphasize that this story is really worth experiencing yourself for the first time without spoilers. It just is, and I don't even want to hint at any details as to tell you why. So now is a good opportunity to talk about the music in this game. As a Mega Man Battle Network fan, I immediately noticed a similarity in some of the tunes that were used. Both of these series were developed by Capcom, and it seems like they actually share some of the composers on the project, but anyone that's heard Mega Man music knows that it's extremely fun, lighthearted, and can also be quite intense and catchy. The music in Ace Attorney is no different. The regular background music and themes are great and soothing, and the intense moments have a lot of fast-paced, catchy themes that I will most definitely be adding to my playlists and leave them on in the background while I work. Heck, I have one of them playing right now as I'm writing this script, so there you go. The music in this game is fantastic, and I find it to be very charming. And to note, this is also the remastered version, since these games were originally on the Game Boy Advance, but the new versions definitely do it a lot of justice and are well done. Now to move on to the gameplay. It's always hard to say something is the quote-unquote weakest element of a game, but if I were to point the finger at one thing in this game, this would have to be it. Being a visual novel, there really isn't that much going on in terms of how much you're actively engaged in it physically. You scroll through the areas, clicking on things and looking for clues, and then you go to court and click on things to make decisions as to what evidence you want to present or what dialogue options you're selecting. Case 5 made an improvement on this where it is allowing you to scientifically analyze blood samples and fingerprints as well as repair broken objects, so it seems like there will be a few more engaging mechanics in the series moving forward, but for just this game, that's my verdict on it. If you're a person who finds a lot of reading tedious or isn't enthralled enough by the mystery and crime aspect of these games, then this probably isn't for you, but the story is worth it. So if you can hunker down and bite down on your lip and go through the experience, I do recommend it. I personally have always been a big reader, and I value story and characters over pure gameplay in most instances, so this was very appealing to me. And I think it's also important to state that at its core, this is a visual novel. You know what you're getting into when you play a game like this, so I actually find it very hard to knock this game for its gameplay. I'm also going to tack this on really quickly and talk about the visuals of the game. In an age where massive open-world games exist with very intricate and detailed animations, this game may seem visually unimpressive. But I actually think the correct word to use to describe it is charming. The environments are all well designed, the characters all look good, and I have to say that the facial expressions that each character has during court sessions or conversations are all unique and can be downright hilarious at times. Anyways, this has been a very long review since I went into the cases in details, but it's time for me to present my final verdict. Hopefully you won't have any objections to this review, but if you do, I guess I'll see you in court, and you better show the right evidence so you're not penalized. Ace Attorney was a very fresh and unique experience for me personally. I love almost everything about the game, except the little fracture in the narrative in the middle. And so I find myself giving it a very good score of 8 out of 10. I was always completely immersed in the game, and I'm looking forward to playing and reviewing the rest of the games in this series. If you've played them, let me know what you think below. Try not to spoil things for me, because I'm still going through them. And let me know what you think if you haven't played it and whether or not you're interested in doing so now. So that's it for me for now, and I'll see you all in the next video very soon. Peace.